Dance of the Dragons has a few turning points that utterly change the direction of the war. Lucerys' death, Blood and Cheese, Rook's Rest, the Battle of the Gullet. I think the First Battle at Tumbleton is among the list, and maybe is where the war transitions into its endgame. The outcome of the battle changes the power dynamics of both the war for Aegon and Rhaenyra in different ways. It's not just the political aspect that makes Tumbleton so important to the story, but it's through both battles and the sack of the town we really see the true devastation and impact of war, especially a war with dragons, which were effectively mini nuclear weapons. Tumbleton was never the same again, and the scars of the Dance of the Dragons were still plain to see by the time of the main book series. In this video, we're going to be breaking down why the First Battle at Tumbleton is so important to both the Blacks and the Greens in deciding the outcome of the Dance of the Dragons. It was the field of fire writ small, Grand Maester Monkin wrote. The writings of Archmaester Gildane on Tumbleton, Fire and Blood, the Dying of the Dragons, Rhaenyra triumphant. Tumbleton is a market town in the Reach, and it's the seat of House Footley. On the surface, it might seem like an insignificant market town, but there are a few key factors as to why this location was so vital for both the Blacks and the Greens. It's located around 60 leagues southwest of King's Landing, which is about 180-ish miles. That might not seem like a lot, but with the huge scale of Westeros, it means it's relatively a stone's throw away from King's Landing. It's almost like a border town between the Reach and the Crown Lands. It's also located on the headwaters of the River Manda, which in itself is a vital trade route. Prior to the Dance of the Dragons, Tumbleton was a flourishing market town with shops, septs and inns like any other town in Westeros. It all comes back to location. House Hightower were of course the biggest backers of the Green faction and could muster somewhere between 10 and 20,000 men. The issue for the Greens and the Hightowers is Old Town is about as south could go, meaning it would be weeks of long marching from Old Town towards King's Landing. So while the Greens started the war with the element of surprise, the Blacks had a lot of houses in the immediate area within the Riverlands and the Crown Lands that would declare for Rhaenyra. Thus why the balance of power would shift towards the Blacks after the Battle of Rook's Rest, and almost certainly after the Battle of the Gullet. Also consider, after the fall of King's Landing, the Green Army under the command of Sir Criston Cole was effectively stuck in the Riverlands, surrounded by enemies, hence why Criston decided to march south to try and link up with the Hightower army under the command of Lord Ormond, marching on King's Landing. As we know, that didn't end well for Criston Cole. So post Butcher's Ball, that Hightower army is really the last proper army the Greens have, unless Boros Baratheon starts pulling his weight. The march from Old Town was hard. The Greens harried by houses in the Reach backing Rhaenyra every step of the way. If it wasn't for Prince Daeron and his dragon Tessarion, the Hightower army would have likely been beaten badly at the Battle of the Honeywine. So here is where Tumbleton comes into play. Ormond Hightower's army is marching to King's Landing, thus they have to pass through Tumbleton to get there. On this long march is also when King's Landing falls to Rhaenyra, so Ormond now has no choice but to keep marching and hope Criston Cole can link up with him. The Green March across the Reach has thousands of small folk and fragments of black armies being pushed closer and closer to Tumbleton as the Greens advance, fleeing from the onslaught. It's also important to recall, while this is all happening, Rhaenyra is struggling to control King's Landing, with growing unrest in the streets due to the lack of food and countless new taxes imposed to try and fill the treasury, given Tywin Lannister had hidden a majority of the crown's gold. We can also factor in later on the horrific death of Prince Maelor at Bitterbridge, where the toddler is literally torn apart by a mob hoping to collect Rhaenyra's reward for him. So this event not only fuels the motivations of both Ormond and Daeron, but results in the sack of Bitterbridge, causing even more people to be displaced, heading for Tumbleton. So, The Greens do reach Tumbleton and begin to siege the town with a black army made up of between 6,000 and 12,000 men from several minor reach lords, Lord Roderick Dustin's Winter Wolves, Ulf White and Hugh Hammer, the Dragonseeds, and their dragons Silverwing and Vermithor are also within the town. The Hightower host we believe is including men from House Hightower, Peake and Roxton, as well as Daeron Targaryen and his young dragon Tessarion. But sources suggest that the Greens in fact outnumbered the Blacks. We just don't know the exact numbers, hence why many estimates range from 10,000 to 20,000 men. So despite the Blacks being outnumbered, it was still a bit 50-50. The defending Blacks had a huge advantage in their defensive positions, as well as 2 dragon riders with large and powerful dragons, whom in theory could easily handle Daeron and Tessarion. So despite being outnumbered, things were kind of a bit 50-50. What very much undermines the Blacks' position, however, is we know a significant number of Greens managed to infiltrate Tumbleton, hiding as refugees. 2 key members of the Blacks, Roger Crone and Owen Borney, were also secretly loyal to Aegon II and waiting to defect. However, this was not clear at the time. Given the pressures on Rhaenyra's hold of King's Landing, and the fact this large Hightower army is basically a stone's throw away, makes this a huge moment for the Blacks and the Greens. If the Greens win this fight, in theory the path to King's Landing is now clear, and Rhaenyra's situation becomes even more perilous. You have to remember news from Tumbleton is part of what fuels the discontent within the city. Hence why whatever happens there is going to calm things down or just make them 10 times worse. Seldom has any town or city in the history of the Seven Kingdoms been subject to as long or as savage as a sack as Tumbleton after the treasons. The writings of Archmaester Gildane on Tumbleton, Fire and Blood, The Dying of the Dragons, Rhaenyra Triumphant. When battle was eventually joined, Sir Garibald Grey sallied out with 6,000 Blacks against Lord Ormond Hightower, whose archers thinned Garibald's ranks significantly. The bowmen of Red Rob Rivers defeated Garibald's men as they retreated from Ormond's heavy cavalry charge. Lord Roderick Dustin, Roddy the Ruin, would then lead the Winter Wolves out of the Postine Gate against more of the Hightower forces. Although the Northmen were outnumbered 10 to 1, the Winter Wolves managed to reach the commanders of the Greens. Roderick first slew Lord Ormond and his cousin, Sir Brendan Hightower, before succumbing to his wounds. Legend says Roddy lost one of his arms while fighting Ormond. It's now, as the tide turned, the dragons came into play. Tessarion and Prince Daeron, across the field, did not in theory pose much of a threat to Tumbleton's defenders, as Tessarion was much smaller than Vermithor and Silverwing. The defenders of Tumbleton thought the battle was won when Ormond was killed. This is why the 2 betrayers, Sir Hugh Hammer and Sir Ulf White, turned their dragons upon the very town they were supposed to defend. They had defected to the Greens, for reasons that are not wholly clear, but speculation suggests they were not completely happy with the rewards they'd been offered by Rhaenyra, given the importance of their position being dragon riders, and both men were known to be very ambitious. Buildings throughout Tumbleton burned to ash, and thousands burned to death or drowned trying to cross the Mander to safety. Outside of the walls, many high-profile Black commanders were killed, the likes of Pate of Longleaf, who was unhorsed and trampled, while Sir Garibald Grey was burned by Tessarion's dragonfire. Sir Roger Crone's men opened Tumbleton's gates to the Greens, and Lord Owen Borney betrayed Sir Merrill the Bold within the town's castle. Lord Footley's men yielded the town, but they were bound and beheaded by the Greens. Now, here's what's so interesting about the First Battle of Tumbleton. Because when you look at the history books and the wider fan view of the battle, while so many key events come out of it, most of all the Betrayal of the Dragonseeds, it's more what happens after that becomes legend. The battle was followed by the chaotic and long, brutal sack of Tumbleton by the Green soldiers, who were left now leaderless with the death of Lord Ormond. Women throughout the town were assaulted, including old women and girls as young as 8, and not even scepters or silent sisters were spared the indignity. Drunken soldiers killed every man they found, no matter if they were old men or young boys, and even some of their own men in confusion. Homes and shops were looted by bands of Greens, and wealthy townspeople were tortured to reveal their hidden fortunes. There were even some claims that babies were impaled upon spears, but how much of that is true is another matter altogether. Sir John Roxton killed Lord Footley and claimed Lady Sharis Footley as a prize of war, and Sir Ulfwhite allegedly bedded 3 maidens every night. The town became an absolute hellhole and would never recover from the bloody sack. Even into the timeline of the main books, it's not fully recovered to its peak, and the scars of the sack are still there to see. Some even go as far as saying the town is now in fact haunted. While Prince Daeron Targaryen was, well, a prince, he wasn't the most senior of the Hightower commanders. Thus, he urged the more senior above him, the likes of Sir Hobbit Hightower, to bring the soldiers under control. But the unremarkable Hobbit was unable to do so. Other nobles squabbled amongst themselves, and Lord Onwyn Peake killed Lord Owen Borney during a war council, and thus the infighting between the commanders of the Greens began, which is what effectively stalls their progress at Tumbleton. All they have sowed, now shall they reap. The words of Alicent Hightower on Tumbleton, Fire and Blood, the Dying of the Dragons, Rhaenyra triumphant. While on the surface, the First Battle of Tumbleton and its sack and aftermath have 3 key events that truly shape the rest of the Dance of the Dragons, and well, its outcome. First off, and the most clear, is the betrayal of the Dragonseeds. Losing Ulf and Hugh and their dragons, Silverwing and Vermithor, is a massive loss for Rhaenyra, because she in theory doesn't just lose 2 dragon riders to the Greens, but effectively 4. Or that's at least what it seems like at the time. She spirals and loses trust in everyone around her, and sees villains in every corner. She calls for the arrest of Adam of Hull and Nettles, believing they would betray her as the other Dragonseeds had done, which of course then provokes Corlys Velaryon, Adam's supposed father, whom is arrested by Rhaenyra for treason and thrown in the Black Cells. When Daemon hears of the arrest warrant for Nettles, he helps her escape Maidenpool before flying off to Harrenhal on his solo mission to deal with Aemond and Vhagar. The Nettles situation is of course a bit more complex, given Rhaenyra believes the rumours that Daemon is sleeping with her, but the net result here is she now is down 4 dragon riders. Corlys is in the cells, and Daemon and his dragon, while still technically under black control, are off to fight Aemond and Vhagar. Daemon has effectively gone rogue. This means the only dragons Rhaenyra has direct control over are her own Syrax, Prince Joffrey's Tyraxis, and Baelor Targaryen's Moondancer. Given that Joffrey and Tyraxis are too young, that makes 2 fighting dragons, meaning without Daemon returning to King's Landing and without the Dragonseeds, Rhaenyra is outnumbered on the dragon front by Daeron, Ulf and Hugh. And if you want, you can also count Aegon and Sunfire. If you're not counting Daemon for Rhaenyra at this point, it also makes sense not to count Aemond towards the Greens. The point is, not only is she now outnumbered, but Syrax and Moondancer are not battle tested, and neither are Rhaenyra or Baelor herself. And given what we know of Rhaenyra, I don't see her riding into battle. Silverwing and Vermithor alone are huge, powerful dragons, and Tessarion, while being much smaller, is combat ready and proven in battle. So the betrayal of Ulf and Hugh really sets off this chain of events that just leaves Rhaenyra open. Now I want to give a brief spoiler alert for future events of House of the Dragon for the rest of this video, in case you're a show viewer who may have stumbled this far into this clearly spoiler-filled video. As things stand after the sack of Tumbleton, the Greens are a few days away from King's Landing, with the roads open to them. When the word of the brutality of the sack reaches the capital, many in King's Landing tried to flee, fearing that the fate of Tumbleton would happen to King's Landing as well. But Rhaenyra had the Gold Cloaks seal the city gates. This did 2 things. It trapped a discontented population within the city walls, allowing that discontent to further fester. But it also exacerbated all the other issues the small folk were already trying to deal with. Trade was non-existent, taxes were heavy, food was running out, and people were hungry, all compounded by Rhaenyra shutting the gates. She was already being blamed for the death of Prince Maelor. And again, spoiler alert, the death of Helaena, who was supposedly beloved by the small folk, and of course for the lack of food. People had had enough. And thus the mood of madness began. The 3 false kings would rise. One, a crazed prophet known as the Shepherd, leading an ever larger mob to the Hill of Rhaenys, inciting the destruction of the Dragon Pit, and the loss of both Joffrey, Syrax, and countless other dragons. Things got so bad so quickly, Rhaenyra had to be persuaded to abandon King's Landing. So when you think about all this, the context of the First Battle of Tumbleton, it was this one event that sets up the endgame for the final stages of the Dance of the Dragons. Everything that comes after it has the fingerprints of the First Battle of Tumbleton on it. And while, of course, the Second Battle of Tumbleton would change things yet again, Rhaenyra, by that point, had already been sent down her ordained path. Now, I've written this video before we've seen the final episode of House of the Dragon Season 3, so I have no idea what's going to happen with Tumbleton in the show. It's already gone a very different route, given the Greens are defending and the Blacks are attacking, and the fact that Daemon and Corlys will be present at the battle. There's also a lot of speculation that they will be merging both the Second and First Battles of Tumbleton, which if you ask me how that's going to work narratively, I'm not sure. You kind of need that gap between the two for all these key plot points in King's Landing to actually transpire. But one thing, even if the show Tumbleton is very different, that I am sure of, is it's still going to act as this important transition point into the final stages of the war, and be the catalyst for Rhaenyra Targaryen's fate.